Thank you. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be here in Australia among friends. I met Greg Lindsay, I don't know how long, I mean, it's almost 10 years, isn't it? Yeah. Since 2006. And what an enduring friendship. Wonderful. It's Greg who introduced me to my husband, Neil. So I do have a wonderful and warm relationship with Greg, with the Center for Independent Studies, and I hope with Australia. I really feel this warmth. I'm jet-lagged and been struggling to stay awake, but after this warm welcome, I hope not to disappoint you. I've been asked to speak on this mega topic. And I'll have to give you a very limited perspective because, again, it is really the challenge of our time. Australia is a liberal society, and so is the United States, so is the Netherlands, the country that accepted me and first introduced me to liberalism in practice. And we are confronted with mass migration, we are confronted with globalization, and we're also confronted with what I would say is pretty much the totalitarian challenge of our time, jihad. And what should we liberals, at least I think of myself now as a classical liberal, what should we think of it? What I'd like to do tonight is to share with you 3 stories that illustrate this. Can you all hear me? I can barely hear myself. Yes, much better. I'm going to share with you 3 little stories that illustrate these dilemmas, and then give you my take on how we grapple with the distinction between Muslims who mean harm and the masses and masses of Muslims who are just getting on with their lives wherever they may be. And finally, I'm going to end with what I think that those of us who subscribe to classical liberalism should do, or rather how we should approach it. You have to excuse me for the glasses. I think we're all getting on in age, which is a good thing, isn't it? So the first story I would like to share with you is it is a quote from a journalist named Uzay Bulut. He is of Turkish origin, and he is writing for the Gatestone Institute in New York. And he has a very long, and I've decided I'm going to quote him at length. And he is telling us about the president of Turkey. And the president of Turkey is a man who believes in conquests. Now, in his own words, this is a quote that was taken in May 30, 2015. It was in a public meeting celebrating, now hold your breath, the 562nd anniversary of the fall of Constantinople. Mr. Erdogan, during that event, praised hoisting the flag of Islam in Jerusalem again and stamping the seal of Islam on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. According to some media outlets, 2 million people attended the event and cheered him. What is the conquest? Erdogan asked his audience. The conquest, he said, is hijrah, expansion of Islam through emigration, following the example of Muhammad, the founder of Islam, and his followers from Mecca to Medina. The conquest, he said, is Mecca. It's to cleanse the Kaaba, the house of Allah on earth, of all the icons. The conquest is Jerusalem. It is when the Caliph Omar stamped the seal of Islam on Al-Aqsa Mosque our first Qibla. Qibla means the direction where Muslims face. The conquest, Mr. Erdogan continued, is Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain. It is to build the most beautiful architecture, literature, and culture of the world, such as in Cordoba and Granada. The conquest, Mr. Erdogan continued in 2015, is Samarkand. The conquest is Bukhara. The conquest is Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. The conquest is Alp Arslan, that is the second sultan of the medieval Muslim Seljuk Empire. The conquest is to open the doors of Anatolia up to Vienna for this blessed nation. The conquest is preparation. The conquest is when the Sultan Murad II abdicated the throne to his 12-year-old son, Mehmet II. And of course, the conquest is the Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror. It is at age 21 to embrace Istanbul, the most favorite city of the world, after destroying the millennial Byzantine. The conquest is to have, he says, the courage, the tenacity, and the sagacity to defy the entire world, even at the hardest times. This is the current president of Turkey. The second story is one that you're familiar with. It's the 5 gentlemen who left Melbourne and drove for 3,000 kilometers and took a boat with them, who wanted to go to Syria. They display, some of the newspapers I read today describe them as dumb and dumber. Now, they may be dumb and dumber, but they are definitely determined, just like Mr. Erdogan. And they share something else with Mr. Erdogan. They share this belief, this ardent belief in the romantic idea of resuscitating the caliphate. And the third story is the story, of course, that you're familiar with, and that is that of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Australia. It is an Islamist organization that has made Australia famous or infamous, depending on who you listen to. I've never heard of someone called Ali Walid. You may have, but he won a Logie. Never heard of that either. But Hizb ut-Tahrir made him famous by accusing him of being a fake Muslim. Now that is dangerous. When an Islamist organization accuses you of not being a proper Muslim, they are in fact declaring that you are an apostate. Again, I have no idea who Ali Walid is, but I read a column in the Inquirer describing him as someone who got to where he is by exploiting the goodness of Australia and the sensitivity to race and such issues. That's very common. That may be true, that may be untrue. But what is evil and dangerous is to describe this man as a fake Muslim. Hizb ut-Tahrir and one of their senior speakers, senior members, was in Turkey also advocating for the caliphate and encouraging Turks to conquer the rest of Europe. These 3 stories, the 5 men who leave Australia, confront us with dilemmas for a liberal society. What should Australia do? Stop them? I have to share with you my basic instinct today when I heard the story. And I thought, why stop them? I don't think they're going to make it. And if they ended up drowning, and as individuals, they are free agents. They made up their minds, they plotted, and the plotting, their romantic utopia, is to go to Syria and terrorize further a population that was subjected, at least for 4 or 5 years, to relentless horrors from their own president and all the jihadist organizations around them. You'll have to forgive me for not feeling very generous towards these gentlemen. But the dilemma is not that we have the certainty that these men would drown in the ocean on their way to jihad. If we had that certainty, we would let them go. But their passports were cancelled. The dilemma for our liberal society is we cannot let them go to harm others. And in fact, as a liberal society, we also have, and that's what makes us distinct from illiberal societies. As a liberal society, we in fact think about their welfare. That is a dilemma for liberal societies. When you think about the Erdogan story, you are confronted with a man who, for at least a decade, made his ambitions crystal clear. Mr. Erdogan was an Islamist. He was put in prison a while back for his jihadist views, and in prison, he learned that working through the system gradually would bring him farther in his idea of resuscitating the caliphate than if he worked against the system. And he worked within the system. And he managed to win elections, election after election. And now that he is in power, he is showing his true colors. But how should the rest of Europe deal with him? The Middle East, North Africa, South Asia are producing more refugees, more displaced peoples, more asylum seekers than anything else. And the European Union leaders, and they deserve a lot of censure because they could have seen this coming, but they are in a place where they can be blackmailed and they're checkmated by Erdogan. But we have an international order. And because of this language, Mr. Erdogan is in fact violating international norms. He signed a deal with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. Can he be trusted? I think not. What do you think? Movements and organizations like Hizb ut-Tahrir confront us with yet more dilemmas as liberal societies. They take advantage of the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of education, the freedom of assembly, here in Australia and in all kinds of liberal societies in Europe and beyond. There's the International Muslim Brotherhood. What Hizb ut-Tahrir is for Australia, we have the Muslim Brotherhood of North America. They establish mosques and schools and enjoy all of these freedoms, but explicitly work to nurture among the young and the impressionable this idea to destroy freedom as we know it. And that is a dilemma. That is a dilemma for liberal societies. Liberalism as an idea is a very young idea. And it has many enemies. It is not inevitable, and it's not invulnerable. So when you have individuals like these 5 gentlemen who are determined in their quest for a romantic utopia, when you have heads of state like Mr. Erdogan, and he's not the only one, He is in fact one of the leading members of the Organization of Islamic Conference, the OIC, established in 1969 with a mission to Islamize first their societies and then gradually the rest of the world. They have a disagreement with outfits like Al-Qaeda and ISIS because they believe that the moment for violence is not ripe. So if you compare Mr. Erdogan to Mr. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is the head of the Islamic State, they don't differ in their objectives. They differ in the means to the objective. And that presents a dilemma for liberal societies, because the one is an elected head of state and the other is a renegade guerrilla man that we are trying to kill. But how in this day and age should we, as liberals and the leaders of liberal societies, deal with that? I think the first thing that we need to do is to answer the question, how do we deal with Islamic, or rather Muslim diversity? And I know you have your ideas, but mine is we should separate the belief system from those who say that they subscribe to the belief system. In other words, there is a distinction between Islam on the one hand and Muslims on the other. Islam is a set of beliefs. It's a political philosophy. It has a faith component. It's a civilization. It is not just one tradition, but many traditions. But it is an abstract system. And as liberals, our duty is to scrutinize it like we scrutinize all other ideas. So to put question marks on the merits and demerits of Islam is perfectly legitimate in a liberal society. But when it comes to Muslims, how can I distinguish between the man who's wearing a beard, whom I see at the airport, who's handling my luggage, who's looking at my passport, and who's ushering me into the plane, from the one that really means harm? And I think we need to find a conceptual framework that improves on the useless framework that we have now, called moderates and extremes. That doesn't tell you anything. If you want to understand the gentlemen, the five of them, and what was driving them, and what is driving Erdogan and all those other heads of state, and why they believe in the caliphate and what the caliphate is all about, what Islamic law is all about, and why some people, are willing to sacrifice absolutely everything they have, including their own lives and the lives of their own children, you have to go back to the founder of Islam, Muhammad. You don't have to read his entire biography. You can, and I urge you to. You don't have to become a Muslim scholar or theologian, but you have to understand what he said and did in Mecca when he first founded the faith, and later on, 10 years later, when he emigrated and took that moment of hijrah and went to Medina, and what he did thereafter. And that is going to help you find a framework with which you can say, okay, I now understand what Erdogan is talking about and what he's referring to. Because when Muhammad, in Mecca, was preaching to the Meccans and telling them to give up their idols and their gods, and adopt his. What he met with was resistance. And in those first 10 years, he used the power of the word. He went from door to door trying to persuade Meccans to give up their gods. And he didn't get very far. And that tells you something. What does it tell you? It tells you that the idea that he was promoting was not strong enough to persuade masses of people to change their minds based on his arguments. And then he goes to Medina and he forms a militia. And he applies other tools. He applies the tool of force. And in those 10 years, he wages over 25 wars, and he permits another 70. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is persuasive. And his successors apply the same logic: force, harsh, organized, cruel, beheadings, sheer terror. And if you read the Quran, the book he left behind apparently, you read the verses that were revealed in Mecca, and they would fit your description and my description of religion. It's about praying and fasting and looking after the poor and so on. You read Medina, and it reads like a war manual. So if you want to understand what it is that motivates and inspires young men, and increasingly young women, to give up everything they have, when they invoke Muhammad in Medina, that gives you a clue of who you have in front of you. And these Medina Muslims, I call them the Medina Muslims, with their agenda, are very explicit. They write, they speak, they are online, they recruit, they establish mosques, they raise money. They don't recognize boundaries. They're not secretive about what they do. It is all out there for all of us to see. But there are hundreds of thousands of Muslims, perhaps even millions of Muslims, who are just happy to go about their daily lives, who will never invoke Muhammad in Medina, probably because they don't know. Most Muslims are not Arab. They cannot read the Quran. And even those who are Arab, if they can read at all, cannot read classical Arabic. So most Muslims, if you think about it, really are not, at this point, engaged in resuscitating the caliphate. And then there's another interesting third group. I call them the modifiers. And as there are more and more wars waged in the name of Islam between Muslims and non-Muslims, and between Muslim sects, there are more and more individuals within Islam who are standing up and who are rejecting it. And I meet them and I read their work. And I know they're in Australia, they're in Europe, but you also read about them in Bangladesh being hacked to death. You read about them even in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom of darkness that spreads Wahhabism. And yet there are individuals like Raif Badawi who openly reject this conflation of religion and politics. There are Pakistanis, there are Indonesians and Malaysians. These are individuals getting larger, and you may have seen them during the demonstrations in Egypt after the Brotherhood came to power, who after 1 year rejected the Brotherhood, unfortunately, to return to another dictatorship. But ultimately, they did reject Sharia. So if you're looking for Muslim diversity and you're asking yourself, who is committed to jihad? Who is indifferent or perhaps vulnerable? And who is committed to fighting jihad? You'll find them. I don't think that that is the greatest dilemma for liberal societies. I'll tell you what the greatest dilemma is for liberal societies. It is this idea of moral relativism, multiculturalism, political correctness. It is the idea of a liberal society and the reality of a liberal society and liberal societies committing suicide. It's the self-inhibition that to discuss Islam as an idea, the way we discuss Christianity as an idea, or socialism as an idea, or nationalism as an idea, or national socialism as an idea, or liberalism as an idea, that if we apply that level of scrutiny to Islam, we are guilty of racism. That is, I think, the inherent weakness in our liberal societies. And the Medina Muslims see that and exploit it. If you are sensitive to white guilt and I'm a Medina Muslim with a mission, why would I not exploit that? It is the departure from what liberal societies were made of, which was to protect the rights of individuals, the rights and freedoms of individuals, and at the same time, nurture those individuals in their own obligations, that choices have consequences, and that individuals are responsible. Instead, we've moved to collectives, ethnic groups, women, the poor. And the left, and especially the far left, are very good and very self-righteous at telling us all about groups, but they are very, very poor at telling us about what happens to the individuals inside those groups. And the Medina Muslims exploit that. You can't blame the Medina Muslims for exploiting that. You can blame the left for letting them do it. And we should do that. I came to the Netherlands in 1992. And in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Germany, in France, I remember marveling as a woman the fact that I could walk around anywhere at any time of day or night. I invite you now to go to Europe, not as women perhaps, but as men, and you'll be stunned at how that has changed. And in many ways, it's because of this cover-up from the left. When people come from my culture and my background, and I'm very familiar with it, because as a woman in all of the other countries I had lived, I could not do that. And young men have been taught that they at any time can take women. And women have been taught to stay away from certain places without being escorted by male chaperones. And if whatever happens to them, it is their fault. When millions of people from that culture come into a liberal society and start groping and harassing and raping women, how does the left respond? They still talk about racism. It has nothing to do with race. It is what happens to the individuals within a collective. You can never, if you are a true liberal, you can never really stray away from individual rights. You cannot use as an excuse some alleged persecution against groups to sacrifice the rights of individuals. Homosexuals in Europe in the 1990s and in the 2000s were more free than they are now. Yes, there was a whole debate about whether they could marry or not, but now they're being advised not to show their homosexuality. Anti-Semitism is back, and it's back with the Medina Muslims. And the left make excuses about the collective. We cannot talk about it. I think the greatest dilemma for liberal societies is the self-inflicted relativism. It's the self-inflicted censorship. And if truly we want to deal with the challenges that the Medina Muslims present us with, the most important thing we have to do is to protect the freedom of speech. If we don't, we sacrifice, we give the platform of ideas to them. They either silence us by force or we self-silence, and then they win. And so we have two battles. One is to fight that self-censorship, this being pulled into this collective nonsense called political correctness. I never get it, really. And the other one is obviously to stand up to the Medina Muslims and argue why Islamic law, Sharia, is bad for all human beings, for men, for women, for men and women, for people with a different sexual orientation, for people with different religions. It is not, Islamic law is not about life on this earth. It is about what is going to happen after you die. And that is why I will never apologize for my statements that Islamic law is ultimately a cult of death. I now hope that I have provoked you enough to get you to ask questions, to discuss, because ultimately I think that's what liberalism is about.